aspects of publishing today, which is scalability, impact, and sustainability. We here are deliberating the impact on ad revenues, subscriptions, content, and how technology is aiding this transformation. While the discussions are covering digital publishing ecosystem overall, a special focus will be on the Indic languages and what are the challenges and the opportunities which are faced by the local language community. Having said that, I would like to move on to our next session. This session is a very important keynote session on the topic building data privacy ecosystem in India. And for the same, I would like to welcome our guests, Mr. Bharat Gupta, Chief Executive Officer, Jagran New Media, in conversation with our esteemed guest, Shri Rajeev Chandrashekar, Member of the Parliament. We welcome both of you, sir. I would now request Mr. Gupta to please take over.
Thank you, Garaba. Good afternoon, friends. Thank you for joining us on this session. Just a quick introduction to build the topic. Internet as a medium started maybe mid 90s as a way to communicate via email. Over the years, the utility increased from towards information consumption, and then there was a layer of services which was added, and these services were to a multitude of financial services or medical services or even transactional services around around the consumerism. So while the medium itself has evolved and the users have evolved from what they were using internet earlier to how they want to use it now, every time a user is on internet, they consume something, they leave these little breadcrumbs as a trail. And often a lot of technology which was designed to enhance the user experience is being victimized to increasingly abuse, if I may use the term, user. So perhaps it is time that increasingly a lot of companies and countries are deliberating on how to protect consumer data. And with this, I'd like to just build up the topic, what's happening in India. And so the Indian government looks to set to legislate a personal data protection bill, DPB, which would control the collection, processing, storage, usage, transfer, protection, and disclosure of personal data of Indian residents. And uh, in nutshell, because India is a nation state, it would treat the data generated by its citizens as a national asset, store and guard it within national boundaries, and reserve the right to use the data to safeguard its defense and strategic interest. And it's very different from a controlled nation like China, where things are very differently. And India is ready to recognize the sensitivity which is surrounding this data. What does it mean for the whole digital ecosystem and all? How does it translate to a working model, a sustainable model for publishers? Are the key moot questions which we have. And today I am very happy to have on panel with us Mr. Rajeev Chandrashekar, National Spokesperson, BJP. Rajeev is a third-term MP representing Karnataka and one of the leading technology and governance advocates in Parliament. His 30 plus years in technology has included being a key part of Intel's path-breaking 80486 and Pentium processors at Silicon Valley, building of lots of India's first and digital brands, including the cellular mobile company. On a professional note, he has a master's in computer science and honorary DSc. While being a computer scientist, I think all of us, we know Rajiv is a tech entrepreneur. And it's very happy to see that Rajiv has also used his experience at Parliament. He has a solid record of activism and advocacy, ranging from raising 2G scam NPAs to issue for veterans and armed forces like OROP, National War Memorial, or up to technology governance issues like net neutrality, privacy, freedom of speech, etc. So I think while all of us are very used to these services around us, it takes a lot which is happening at behind these services to make it a better world. So over to Raji. And my first question to Rajiv, would be to help us understand that what is the data protection bill and what are the principles basis which it is being proposed.
So, Bharat, thank you for having me over this on the show and this program, and for that warm welcome. Uh, Bharat, a couple of things I just want to add to your your introduction and how you set this up. The internet actually started in the mid to late 80s, and I was in the US at that time, and I was actively involved as a young engineer in what was DARPANET and ARPANET those days. And I'm saying this not to get any brownie points, but to make the point that the internet was designed to be an ownerless, seamless network of people, a network of computers communicating with each other. And really, it was seen as a platform for communication, with the email being the killer app as the years went by. Uh, and it was never meant to be what we see today. It was never envisaged that it would become what it is today, which are these islands of commercial exploitation that sit on top of the internet. But that is the way technology evolves, and that is where we are today. And therefore, we should look at the internet obviously from today's view rather than what it was and how it was envisaged and how it was conceptualized. So that's point number one. I just wanted to make that point. The backstory for the data protection bill in India is a over 10-year effort by many, including people like me, to bring individual privacy in the digital domain into the forefront, and to start having governments and institutions discuss that. And if you see this, most of this conversation, and it will be surprising for you to know that I introduced a bill in 2010, 11 years ago, in Parliament, called the Privacy Bill in 2010. And you'll ask me, so why in 2010? What was going on in 2010 that woke me up and said I should do a privacy bill? And the reason for that was Aadhaar. And the first real massive public domain data collection exercise by the state was Aadhaar. And it was done in a manner with very good intentions, and it will improve governance and all of that. But it was clear that there was no respect for the donor of the data. That means if Bharat Gupta was giving that data or Rajeev Chandrashekar was giving the data, it was not important in that architecture for Bharat Gupta's data or Bharat Gupta to be confident that his data would not be shared with anybody else. And and it didn't seem like anybody was bothered about it. And actually, many editorials were written about privacy being a living room, air-conditioned living room issue, and it is only for the elite, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, long story short, um, many people, including I, went to court, Supreme Court, and there was a PIL. And in 2016, and this is a very important milestone, the Supreme Court ruled that under Article 21, the right to liberty, which is a fundamental right, privacy is also a fundamental right for all Indians. So privacy is no longer something that the government of India or anybody is giving as a favor to the citizen of India. It is now a fundamental right for you, me, and every other Indian. And so, to ensure there is a legislative framework and an architecture that captures what the do's and don'ts of privacy as a fundamental right means to everybody on the internet, including intermediaries, including publishers, the government then set out to do the data protection bill. So, to answer your question, and I'm coming to that answer now, which is the most important one, the data protection bill operationalizes and legislates how the fundamental rights to privacy will be operated through law. Because why this is important is every fundamental right in the Constitution, which is right to speech, right to life, all of them have exceptions where, for example, Article 19, right to speech, your right to speech is not absolute. For example, the right to speech cannot include incitement, include lying, including defaming. And so therefore, what are the exceptions to the fundamental right to privacy? How do they impact businesses? How do they impact intermediaries? How do they impact the citizen? That is what the legislative construct that the data protection bill will attempt to deliver on.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. I think this was quite insightful to first understand what is the primarily the basis of having this bill in place. And often, as publishers, when we are in this, if I may use the term, publishing industry, we often fail to recognize the foundation stones which is happening. Now, I think this brings us to the next point that. When we try to understand the proposed bill, there are several layers surrounding the three-tier mechanism that is being proposed by the government in terms of structuring of data, in terms of storage, in terms of what can be processed within India to what can be allowed to be processed outside. So I understand that it's very complicated. And when we talk about India in terms of infrastructure, often publishers used a hybrid model of having servers within India to using servers outside of India, having analytics softwares which are processing data outside, but they bring it back to India, or tying up with several ad networks of partners who often tell the publishers that by way of data enrichment, they can help publishers to monetize more effectively. So, from purely from a publisher perspective, uh, what is the approach being adopted towards this bill?
So, Bharat, first of all, there is no bill. There was a bill that the
Sorry,
government.
yeah,
Sorry, no, no. I just want to clarify that there is a bill that the
yeah,
government proposed that was referred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee, headed by
yeah.
Meenakshi Lekhi, of which I am a member, and the committee is in the process of evaluating that bill. So currently, most of what is out there in the media is speculation on what the bill will have or will not have. So, and I obviously cannot speak about the bill till the bill is actually presented to Parliament. But however, there are certain basic principles that apply here to anybody who's an intermediary or a publisher, and who's delivering services, content to a user, and collecting information from that user in return, or as a condition to deliver that service or content. And those basic principles are the following. Number one, that you will seek consent from the user before collecting any data. This is almost clearly a no-brainer. It is a clear number one principle. Number two, that the data that is consented to by the what we call the data fiduciary, the data principle, is going to be data that is going to be used for a specific purpose. Now, this is a very important aspect of data privacy, because up to now, anybody collecting data from a user has no fetters in terms of what he or she could do with the data.
Good
He
to
can
yeah.
sell it, he can export it, he can analyze it, he can send it to China, he can send it to Timbuktu, and there were no fetters. So here there is a second very core principle that is part of very intrinsic to data privacy, which is you have to seek the consent of the user or whose data it is before that data is anything is done with that data, and or there's a specific set of purposes for the data to be used. Third, there is going to be obviously some debate about whether the data that a intermediary collects or a fiduciary collects is going to be data that is stored here. Should there be different types of data, very sensitive data, very critical data, not so critical data? Then there is non-personal data. So the categorization of data and what does that mean in terms of storage? What does that mean in terms of processing by third party, etc., etc. So that's the third principle. That is storage. The fourth is this issue of uh, third party, and this is very important, I think, Bharat, from what you
Yeah.
say, which is publishers basically giving it to different firms who then use the data for their own analytics and selling advertisement tech companies, etc. That is something that is going to be, that model is going to be under threat with the data protection regime. And you can see that even a big behemoth like Google who is under pressure now to remove this cookie tracker game that they have played for the last 15, 20 years and have made billions of dollars from it. They are now giving commitments that they will stop that. That is this tracking of consumer behavior, collecting information about consumer behavior without the consent of the consumer and using that to monetize is something that is going to be challenged by the data protection regime. But central to this is going to be always that as long as you have consent, an informed consent, not the 3 pages of fine print consent where you type I agree at the end. That consent architecture is going to be a consent architecture that is going to be not just a one-time architecture. I think people are going to seek renewal of the consent. It is not going to be one time you give it and then for the rest of your life you are sort of a slave to the company. All of these things are being discussed as part of the overall architecture. But the basic fundamental principles I've outlined, these 4 or 5 things are the basic principles.
Super. Thank you, Rajiv. I think that classification into the four cohorts gives us a great sense. And I think it is very clear that publishers have to be now not only very transparent, but very respectful towards the consumer data. And as you said, rightly said, that obtaining the permission is of paramount importance, that also out of awareness. So, I understand that this transition is not easy, and when something similar like a GDPR was introduced in Europe, a lot of Indian publishers faced the flack, and they lost a lot of data, they lost a lot of advertising, and things like that. And of course, one of the primary reasons for a successful GDPR implementation was because the governance over there was very, very tough towards compliance. So, which brings us to how is the Indian government planning compliance? So now that the architecture is more or less ready and it is being fine-tuned for India, so how does the government see that? What are the teeth it would add to make companies comply with it? And let's first answer this.
So Bharat, one of the things that I think people don't have enough awareness of, and I think this is a good way to spread that awareness, is that currently any consumer of any platform can assert his or her right to privacy. It is the right to privacy is a fundamental right that has been ruled by the Supreme Court. And frankly, it is already very surprising why people are not litigating more with platforms on board. My privacy has been violated. You've taken, let's say, assume you're a Chinese platform and you've taken my products and you've taken my data and you've exported it. Technically, there should be a lot many more cases that are being litigated because we all know privacy is being breached today, day in and day out. Whether it
Yeah.
is willfully, whether it is negligently, whether it's accidentally, we know that that is happening. Now, the the basic idea of the government is that while right to privacy is a fundamental right and the data protection bill brings a balance between the rights and the obligations of consumers and the business, we also don't want to make it very difficult for business to be sort of buried under the weight of compliance and being frightened by privacy being a fundamental right. So there are almost two seemingly conflicting objectives of any policy
Right.
making, which is one is, of course, the consumer wants to assert his or her right, and that right, as any democratic government will do, you have to protect that right legislatively. But we also, as especially this government, that and under this prime minister and our prime minister, who has put so much effort into startups, entrepreneurship, the whole digital India mission by Prime Minister Modi. So we also want to balance the compliance requirements and the adjudication process to be as, let us say, painless for those who are abiding by the law, and of course, painful for those who willfully violate it. So
Hmm.
the idea that has come up, and the government has put this idea up, which is to create a data protection authority, which is a regulator of sorts,
Yeah.
and a regulator that will be highly qualified, We have, of course, members in the committee have argued that it need not be restricted to bureaucrats and judges. There should be qualified people, people who understand the digital domain, and having people who are qualified and understand that this is not about policing the business as much as it is enabling the consumer and helping the business comply with this. So I think that is going to be a challenge, because this is a fresh mindset in the government system, to think of a regulator as being an enabler of data protection rather
Right.
than a policeman of data protection. I can speak personally for myself. I have argued strongly, outside parliament, inside parliament, that the data protection authority is going to be India's test for a modern, world class digital domain regulator. It should be very unlike most of the other government institutions that we have created in the last 25 years, where it is more of a policing by the state, big brother kind of an approach. Here we need something that is nimble, technology enabled, supportive of business that are legitimate, and of course, protecting the rights of the consumer. So that is the institution that we need to build. And I think this is something that government and industry and government and consumer groups should all work together to build something that is really truly modern. Because otherwise, any bill, however well drafted it is, will be killed at the altar of poor regulation. I mean, I'm sure your audience and many entrepreneurs know this, that you'll have the greatest of intentions in terms of legislation, as Parliament does, but it'll be then finally left to some guy in some regulatory institution to effectively destroy the entire spirit and intent of it. So we definitely need a world class, contemporaneous institution, which is going to be the Data Protection Authority. And I think industry will play a big role in how that is conceived, evolved, manned, and what kind of capabilities are built there.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. I think it's really heartening to know that the government is applying a very constructive and progressive approach towards building this sustainable ecosystem by way of empowerment and jurisdiction. So we have some audience questions,
Sure.
and I'll take them one by one. So I think question number one is that what steps are being taken to build proper infrastructure for the development of a data privacy ecosystem in India?
Yeah, so also the biggest infrastructure, the most important critical part of the infrastructure is, like I said, the infrastructure of the Data Protection Authority. I think the
Yes.
capabilities, the capacities, the human infrastructure, so I think that is something. Uh, and if there is a government, and I have dealt with various governments in the past, as an entrepreneur, as a member of parliament. But if there is a government that is truly determined to create and architect a future proof, sustainable digital legislative ecosystem, it is this government. So I think there will be plenty of discussion, plenty of engagement of what a DPA should look like. And I think that is the simply the most important part of the infrastructure inventory for the success of any data protection bill.
Super. Thank you, Rajiv. The next two questions are very similar. They are more around financial lines. So, what do you think Indian financial data should be saved on a local server, or is there a need for stricter regulation of digital payments data in India?
This issue of data localization, Bharat. Now, whether it is for critical data like financial or health or personal data, and we can have a separate debate on what constitutes critical, what constitutes personal. This is a debate that has two sides to it. One is, of course, the data sovereignty piece. That is, if we have data today, which is Indian origin data, Indian consumer data, uh, will the legislative protection of privacy of that data extend to beyond our geographies? So if the data is exported by, let us say, company A to the US and stored there, does the legislative protection of the data protection bill apply there? So data localization is a conversation that is about the jurisdiction of our law and whether the law will apply to an intermediary if he stores it abroad. Number one. Number two, the flip side of the argument is entrepreneurs want choice. They don't want to be told, look, you have to store it in the 2.5 cloud data servers in India. And that the two of them may be contemporary technology or not. They may be expensive or cheap, but you have to do it because data localization is a norm. So these are the two sides of this argument: the data sovereignty and consumers' right to privacy, and the fact that entrepreneurs truly deserve choice in terms of where they store their data. Of course, the compromise answer to that is that you mirror the data here and make sure that anybody who collects data in India, whether they are foreign jurisdiction, sign up to say that they are compliant with Indian law, and not have this, what we are seeing with Twitter today, play out again, which is that there is this little tweedledum and tweedledee about whether I am actually compliant with Indian law. Should I be compliant with Indian law? I am based in San Francisco. My head of sales is based here, and therefore the law doesn't apply to us. The fact is that in a digital India ecosystem, anybody doing business in India, dealing with Indian consumers, must comply with Indian law. And if that is addressed with a combination of a hybrid data localization model, then the choice that the consumers, entrepreneurs want about multiple data server entities, as well as protecting privacy, both will be met.
Super. I think this is a very, very right explanation. And Rajiv, on a last note, what I wanted to understand is till the time the Data Protection Authority is being formed, uh, how should the Indian publishers or service providers gear up for this change? Are there any external agencies in India, within India, who understand these changes and help the publishers to gear up for this change? Or is it something that publisher A can achieve in-house? But what are your views on that?
No, my views are that I think, first of all, publishers, intermediaries must realize that there is going to be a change. There is going to be disruption in the current model, and that disruption is going to come legislatively. As a matter of fact, it's already there because of after
Right.
2016. That is the law of the land. But this legislation will disrupt the model for many people who are basically monetizing consumer data as the principal revenue model. And so, therefore, my own suggestion to friends who are in media and people who entrepreneurs who are involved in media is start looking at your revenue model as and diversify the revenue model where you are not fully dependent on this model of monetizing consumers. And unfortunately, too many platforms, small and big, today are built solely around the business model of monetizing consumer data. So you will need to move, if you're a publisher, into subscription, paywall type of models. And effectively, in my opinion, this is a good thing because it qualitatively moves publishing back into areas of quality, consumer loyalty on the back of content, rather than just getting them, clickbaiting them, and getting them for just collecting the data with all kinds of fake news, or all of that that you know about more than I do. So
Yeah.
it does represent a need to change your business model. And I'm not saying it's dramatic, it's not drastic, it's not something that is going to destroy companies, but and the government, I believe, in reasonableness, will give a fair amount of time for that transition, maybe a year, maybe a year and a half, whatever. But it is important to understand that businesses that are built solely around or predominantly around monetizing the data of their users will find it challenging to continue with the data after data protection.
I think that's a perfectly valid suggestion of building factual and credible content to increase the brand loyalty, to increase the share of mind. Is where the answer lies for us. And the technologies will keep on changing, the models would change, but we have to get a core in place and move away towards being a more responsible media.
Absolutely.
So it was a pleasure to talk to you,
Thanks.
Rajiv. Thank you so much for taking out time and joining us. and educating us on this subject.
Thank you, Bharat.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Gupta, and thank you so much, Mr. Chandrashekar, for being a part of the session and sharing such amazing insights with us. Thank you to the audience as well. And I would like to especially thank our knowledge partner, Kantar. And we will be back with another exciting session shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.